Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for turning up. Thank you for being here. It's exciting to be back again after school holidays. I hope you enjoyed the extra hour on a Sunday morning for the last couple of weeks. But we're back. And it's hard for me to get my mind around the fact that in just another 10 or so weeks, that'll be it for the year. And then Christmas will be upon us. It feels like we were just... Some people are excited. Just as long as no one sets up decorations until December 1st, it's fine with me. I'm a purist. But we'll get there in due course. But I feel like we were just starting out at the beginning of the year, not all that long ago. But I'm really excited for where our studies have taken us. And I'm very excited actually about the lesson for this morning. So let's have a look at the memory verse real quick and then we'll dive headfirst into the lesson. So let's have a look at that. Jeremiah 17 verses 9 and 10. Give you a moment just to find that. Once you have found that, let's say it then beginning with the reference after 2. 1, 2. Jeremiah chapter 17 verses 9 and 10. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? I, the Lord, search the heart. I try the reins, even to give every man according to his ways and according to the fruit of his doings. Jeremiah chapter 17, verses 9 and 10. Anybody feeling up for a go of reciting that? Sure.
Jeremiah chapter 17, verses 9 and 10. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? I, the Lord, search the heart. I try the reins, even to give every man according to his ways and according to the fruit of his doings.
Excellent. Well done. Anybody else want to have a go this morning? People are being volunteered. Are you in agreement with the being volunteered? Willingly, but no, you don't have to. Anyone else want to have a go real quick? Once, twice. Okay, let's move on. Genesis 45 this morning. In our Bibles, Genesis chapter 45, that's where we are up to. And we left at a difficult part, at least for me anyway, where we left off 3 weeks ago. We left right at the most, perhaps, depending how you look at it, but the most important part of this story. Right at the very top of the climax, we had to just stop and go on break for a few weeks. But we're going to pick right back up, right in the thick of the action in Genesis 45. So let's have a look then at verse 1 and maybe verse 2 here. And then what we'll do is we will pray before we begin. So let's have a look then. Genesis 45, beginning in verse 1, it says, Then Joseph could not refrain himself before all them that stood before him. And he cried, Cause every man to go out from me. And there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard. Have a look at verse 3. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph. Doth my father yet live? And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. And I bet they were very troubled right then in that moment. But what we're going to see this morning is we're going to see the first interaction that they have knowing who Joseph is. So the brothers are there, and we've really worked our way through the story and got to this point. We understand what's going on. The brothers came down once for grain. They were accused of being spies. Remember, they reached that agreement concerning taking grain. One brother would be left behind until they came back with the younger brother. They've done that now. They've come back with the younger brother. And remember, they had a feast. Joseph put on a spread for them. He gave them the opportunity to enjoy a lot of the nice things that Egypt had. They enjoyed his company and his presence. And then he sent them back home with an abundance again of grain, but with one catch. Remember, he took his cup, his silver cup, and he put it into the sack of Benjamin, knowing full well what his plan was. And the plan was he sent his servant out to go there and to search the bags on the presumption that something was missing. His cup was missing. And lo and behold, they found the cup in Benjamin's sack. We remember how that played out. It was found there, and so they all were taken back to Egypt. And we remember there the brothers' plea in the previous chapter. Again, we saw there how they made this plea. And we saw in particular Judah there standing up because he was the one that had staked his life. Remember what he'd said to his father concerning his brother. He said, basically, you can take my life from me if I don't return back with Benjamin. So Judah made this great plea, this personal plea, and at the end of that plea, he offers himself as a substitute. He says, I'll stay here and I'll be your servant forever, just let the others go. And it's right at that moment that Joseph has now heard the pleas of his brothers, and now it says there he couldn't refrain himself. That means he couldn't hold it all together anymore. He had done so well for a great period of time now to keep a straight face, to keep this appearance up. Remember, he was speaking to them through a translator. So he wasn't conversing with them in Hebrew as he could have done, but he was speaking to them through a translator. He was hiding his emotions. We saw in the previous chapter, remember, he had to leave the room at one point in order, again, to keep his emotions in check. But now at this very point here, it says that he could not refrain himself. He couldn't keep it hidden anymore. And he cried, and he made that request for everybody to go out, everybody to leave the room that was an Egyptian, that was not one of his brothers. And then right there in that setting, it says he made himself known unto his brethren. And it's interesting, we read there in verse 2 that he wept aloud. So he was crying and he's weeping audibly, you could hear it. And it says there that the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard. So he was so moved emotionally, and his weeping was so intense that the people outside could hear it. So he told everybody to leave the room. But they went into the next room and into other parts of the house, and they could still hear what was going on. They could hear the emotion boiling over for Joseph, and they're wondering, what's going on? Like, why is he so moved by this? And everybody around them hears. But in that room, we see there Joseph says to his brethren 3 words, very profound: I am Joseph. And now, interesting to note, he's not speaking through a translator here now. So everyone else has left the room. He sent everybody out intentionally. And you can imagine the shock in his brothers' minds and in their eyes as they look at him. He sends everybody out of the room, and now he's going to speak directly to them in their native tongue, directly to them in Hebrew. And he makes that very simple statement, I am Joseph. And they were troubled. They were bothered by that. They were not sure what to think, really. Because it's been, remember, a long time. It's been like 20 years since everything began a long time ago when Joseph was 17. This is a long time has passed, and a lot has happened in that period of time, but now he makes that statement, it's me. And they're troubled and they're bothered by it, but he asks the question again, doth my father yet live? So he was very interested in his family, and he had a great relationship with his dad before going to Egypt, so it's no wonder again that in Joseph's mind is again this persistent question of, how is my family? How is dad doing back home? So that's right in the front of his mind there. But it says that his brothers couldn't answer him. They couldn't respond. They were just shocked. Have you ever been like that in a situation where you're so shocked and stunned that the words just freeze up? Your brain just turns to mush and you just have no idea what to say. You're on the spot. That's how these guys feel. They're caught out. They have nothing to say. And they're troubled now because they don't know what's going to happen. They have no idea what's going to happen now. Like, this is their worst nightmare all coming true at once. The person that you hurt, you tried to kill the most, now you've just realized it's them that's in such a powerful position over you, and he can really do what he wills at this point. There's no restraint or restriction upon Joseph as far as how he treats them now. He could literally do anything he chooses to them. They are completely 100% at his mercy. As the ruler here in Egypt, he can deal with them as he pleases, and so they're troubled. And have a look at verse 4. And Joseph said unto his brethren, come near to me, I pray you. So I beg you, come close. And they came near, and he says it again, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Now he's going to continue to speak to them. He says, now therefore, so because of this, be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves, that you sold me hither. And I want you to notice these next few words. For God did send me before you to preserve life. So Joseph looks at his brothers, these people who have wronged him so badly. They tried to kill him. They couldn't kill him, so they threw him in a well, which would have hurt him quite significantly physically. He pleaded and cried for help. They wouldn't listen. They ignored his pleas for help. Ultimately, they take him up and they sell him to foreigners into slavery. And that's the last they hear of him. That's the last they know of him. But that's how terrible they treated and how wickedly they treated their own brother. But notice what Joseph says. He says, don't be grieved. So don't be upset about what has happened. And then he says to them, don't be angry with yourselves. That's a normal human response. These brothers would have been annoyed at themselves. Have you ever done something and been annoyed at yourself for doing it? You've regretted it. You've been kicking yourself after doing it. Like, why did I do that? Sometimes we do that. Sometimes we do the wrong thing and it's maybe out of ignorance, or maybe we just didn't have all the right information and so we regret it. We kick ourselves for doing it. But he says to them, don't be grieved. Don't be angry at yourselves that you sold me hither. Why? Why should they not be that? Because that would be normal for them to be that way. He says, for God did send me before you to preserve life. Now that sounds really different. I don't know about you, but does that sound very different to the story that we've been reading? I mean, we read about brothers that were wicked, that did terrible things sexually, physically, in their family, their dishonesty. We read about a lot of bad things that these people did. But now when Joseph is telling the story, he says, God sent me here. But when we read the story, it said the brothers sold him into slavery. And it's an interesting paradox here that we're reading and that we're going to understand, I believe, this morning as we see life through a different lens. See, there are a lot of truths in the Bible the Bible is all truth, but there's certain specific truths in the Bible that really shed light on our circumstances more than perhaps some others. There are different lenses that God gives us in His Word that help us understand the world around us in very profound ways. And this is one of those. Because having clarity in trials, being able to correctly understand and see what's going on, is something and it's perspective that only God's Word can provide and only God can give. It is only by the grace of God that you can come through a 20-something year trial like Joseph just has and look back at it and say, God did that. He could have explained it many other ways. He could have said, yeah, you guys were mean and you were slack and this is what you did, but it kind of worked out all right for me. Like he could have framed it many different ways. But he doesn't talk about what they did at all. He turns it around, the opposite way around, and says, God did something in this. It was God that wanted me to come down here. Now, yeah, what they did was terrible. He's not denying that. He's not negating what they did was horrible. But God had a plan in that. And that's what we're going to see this morning, that even in the midst of the wrong things we do in life, God still has a plan. God is still in control. And only God can bring good out of these terrible circumstances. Now, God does that. That's a statement of fact. God does bring good out of tragedy. It's the choice is over to us of how we see that, though. Because we know that that's true. That's not something that's up for debate. God does bring good. Whether we choose to see it that way or not is up to us. It's like a pair of glasses that you put on and that enable you to see very clearly. Because God has an ability, we call it the omniscience of God. It's a difficult word. Omni just means all, omniscient means knowledge. So we talk about God knowing everything. God knows everything from the beginning to the end. He knows it all. He knows everything about you, everything about me, everything you'll face tomorrow, everything you faced yesterday. God knows it all. And when we look at the story of Joseph, we read here, Joseph saying that God sent him to preserve life. Now, back when the brothers sold Joseph to slavery, they didn't know that there was a famine coming. That was something that only God knew would happen 20 years later. So there are things that God is doing in the present that are in preparation for the future and that affect more than just us, that God is doing in our life, but we don't see that. And it's not ours to see. And sometimes we need the hindsight to look back at it and see that's what God was doing. Sometimes in the present it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But that's the eyes of faith, to see that even in my present trouble, and that's what Joseph's had for years now. This is not a new phenomenon for him. This is something that has been habitual in his life. It's been built upon many years of walking faithfully with God. His faith has grown, and this is not something he just realized. He has lived this for 20 years, and now he's making this statement to the people who hurt him the most, that God had a great plan in this. God knew that something was going to happen in the future, and God was rearranging things in preparation for this terrible event to happen, and God has actually brought something good. God has saved life even in what seems like a tragedy. I often think of it like a parent. Now, this is a weak illustration, so there are obviously holes in it, but think of yourself as a parent dealing with your child. There are certain things that you know your child just doesn't know, because children have a very limited knowledge and their brain is still developing. And so there's a lot of things that as a parent you know ahead of time that certain things can and will happen. I think of a good example with my son just this past week. He got a new little Matchbox car, and he loved this little Matchbox. It was like a buggy, and he treasured it. He carried it everywhere for a few days, and he was so glad to have it. And he was out with my wife, and we were out during the week. They came to see me for lunch at work. And he decided to throw it into a bush. He thought that would be a fun thing to do, to toss it in the bush. What he didn't count on was the fact that if he threw it in the bush, he might not get it back. So they looked for a while and they couldn't find that particular car. And so in the end, with a couple of tears, he had to leave without the car. The car's gone, it's not coming back. Now he has no idea. All he knows is, that was my favourite car, I threw it in the bush, it's gone, like that's it. Have to deal with the emotions, move on. He didn't know that I went back and got the car from the bush. I went back there an hour later, I spent a while digging through the bush, I found the car. He had no idea. When I got home, I asked him what had happened with the car. And so he's telling me the whole story. Now I know the car's in my pocket. He doesn't know that. He doesn't know I have the car that he wants so dearly on my person. But I'm asking him, he's telling me about how sad he was that he lost the car. Now he has no idea I'm about to pull the car out and give it to him. But in his mind, like, this is just tragedy. This is disaster. This is the worst thing that can happen. And so I asked him to explain it. He walked me through everything that happened. And then I said to him, I've got something for you. And I pulled out the car. And you can imagine the look on his face when he saw that car. He was so happy to get that car back. And to say he was over the moon would be an understatement. But in his mind, that was it. It was gone. It was never coming back. But he doesn't have all the extra knowledge about what's going on. He doesn't know where I was. He didn't know that I could get the car, because I can find a car in a bush. It's not too difficult to do. Like, he doesn't know all of that. All he sees is just the tragedy and his own sadness and how heartbreaking it is to lose something that's dear to him. But he didn't know and have all the information that I had. And that's a weak illustration, I understand that, but in a much greater way, God has that ability in our lives. We see the broken pieces. We see the tragedy. But God sees what he's doing. God has the car in his pocket, so to speak. He knows what he's about to do. We don't know it yet sometimes. But that's faith. That's seeing faith, or that's having faith. That's seeing life through the lens of faith. And so that's what Joseph has here, as he has this clarity in his trial about what is really going on here. So let's have a look at the next verse then, and I want to see how this unfolds, and then I want to make some applications as we finish this morning when we get to the end of the lesson. So have a look then at the next verse, what he says. In verse 6. He says, "For these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in which there shall neither be earing nor harvest." So he's explaining to them about this famine. Now they know that there's a famine, they're affected by it. They have no idea that it's going to be 7 years. They don't know about the 7 prosperous years beforehand. All they know is that it's bad and they don't know when it's going to end. Joseph clarifies for them, this is what's going on. There's been 2 years of famine. There are 5 years still to come. There's going to be no harvest. Look at verse 7. And God sent me, again, notice his language here, sent me before you to preserve you, a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Can you see how the whole story is flipped on its head now? They wanted to hurt him. He's the one that's helping them now. God sent me here to deliver you. God sent me to save your lives. They tried to take his life. But now God has reversed the roles. Now Joseph's the one saving their lives. He's sparing them. God's used him to do that. And again, it says there, to preserve your posterity, to preserve your prosperity essentially in the earth, your ability to live and your ability to dwell and to have the things you need and to save your lives ultimately. But notice verse 8, so now, again, it was not you that sent me hither. Notice he's going to reiterate it for the 3rd time. It was not you that sent me hither, but God. And he hath made me a father to Pharaoh, and a lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Again, Joseph's explaining this to them, and again, he reiterates to them once more. It was not you, but it was them. It was them that sold him into slavery. But Joseph is seeing this from a different perspective. Yes, you tried to hurt me. Yes, you sold me to slavery. But it was actually God that used that. God took that act of wickedness, that act of sinfulness and pride and all of the things that were wrong about what the brothers did. God took that and used it to transport a 17-year-old boy down to Egypt, where he would ultimately become the ruler and save everybody through his wisdom and planning through the years of plenty and the years of famine. So God was moving Joseph, and their wickedness, as bad as it was, God used that as the vehicle to get Joseph down to Egypt. Now there's a story that has a similar plot line in the New Testament, and it's what we celebrate at Christmas time. You read in Luke chapter 2, you read about the birth of Christ. Now, Mary and Joseph didn't live in Bethlehem where Jesus was born. They needed to get to Bethlehem for Jesus to be born, not just because Bethlehem was a nice place to have kids, it wasn't actually, but it was to fulfill a prophecy, a very specific prophecy about the Messiah being born in Bethlehem as a descendant of King David. It was a very specific promise. But Mary and Joseph lived nowhere near Bethlehem. But what God did to get them down to Bethlehem was he upended the whole world through a census decreed by Caesar, the most powerful man in the world, to move 2 young people down to Bethlehem. That's what God can do. He can rearrange world events, world affairs, world leaders to move one person from one place to another. Now again, we don't know what's about to happen. They didn't know at this point in time what was coming in Egypt. But God knew, and God is moving people around as he sees fit to preserve their lives, to bless them, to help them, even though they had no idea about all of it. That's the beauty of what God does. God is working in powerful and profound ways in people's lives, sometimes beyond what we realize. So he says and reiterates there, it was not you that sent me, but God. And not only did God send him there, but he explained to them that he is now a father. Now that doesn't mean he's Pharaoh's father, physically speaking. It means as a father figure, as a mentor. Remember, he's the one advising Pharaoh now on trade, on economics. He's advising Pharaoh. He's become a father figure to Pharaoh. Pharaoh is consulting him. And the Lord of his house, so he's the governor of Pharaoh's own house and a ruler throughout the land of Egypt. That is the position that Joseph has been promoted to, again, by God. Joseph recognizes this is God doing this in my life. Yeah, people have tried to hurt me. Remember, how did he become the ruler in Pharaoh's house? Well, he was, again, lied about by Potiphar's wife. He was thrown in jail. But again, did you see there how Joseph doesn't blame any of the people that wronged him throughout his trial? Now, we're not going to really see it here because it doesn't come out We'll see it later in Genesis 50, the heart of forgiveness that Joseph had. But this, what we're seeing here is the outflow of the heart of forgiveness. Although we're not talking about it yet, you can see that this attitude that he has comes from a heart of forgiveness. He's not bitter towards these people that have wronged him so badly. Again, see there, he doesn't mention Potiphar's wife. He doesn't mention jail. That's how he became the governor of Egypt, because he went to jail, because he was wronged, because he had an ability to interpret the dreams that the men had in prison, and he was able to meet the butler and the baker, and ultimately he interpreted Pharaoh's dream. So a lot of the things that were happening to him were off the back of someone doing something wrong to him. It wasn't him trying to push his own resume forward. It was him simply walking by faith and responding to what was happening around him, walking with God, and God was blessing him. And he recognizes that. This is what God's doing in his life. That's how he sees his situation. So have a look then at the next verse, what he asks them to do. Notice they haven't said anything yet. He says, "Haste ye, and go up to my father, and say unto him, Thus saith thy son Joseph, God," notice again how he sees it, "God hath made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down unto me, tarry not." So don't wait, come straight away. "And thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen, and thou shalt be near unto me, thou and thy children, and thy children's children, and thy flocks, and thy herds, and all that thou hast. And there will I nourish thee, for yet there are 5 years of famine, lest thou and thy household, and all that thou hast come to poverty." And have a look at verse 12. "And behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin, that is my mouth that speaketh unto you." So he says to the brothers, I want you to get up and go back home to Dad, explain to Dad that I'm alive. Now, he doesn't know what the brothers told his dad. He doesn't know all of the details of the deception. He only has the information that they gave him last time they came down, how they talked about one brother is dead and our father is very grieved about it. They don't know, Joseph doesn't know the entirety of the deception that they have explained to their dad. But he says, go back and tell Dad Joseph's alive. Tell him that I'm well. I'm the governor of Egypt. And we have a place here at Goshen, close to where Joseph's palace was. And there you'll be provided for, you'll be protected, you'll have everything you need for the next several years while this famine continues on. So Joseph wants them all to come down now. And he asks them to do it. And he says, when you see Benjamin, that's what he said there in verse 12, your eyes see in the eyes of my brother Benjamin, that it is my mouth that speaketh unto you. He said, just if he's not sure about it, just ask Benjamin. Benjamin knows that this is me. Benjamin can see that. He can see it. You can see it. This is my mouth that speaks unto you. And verse 13, and ye shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt, and of all that ye have seen, and ye shall haste and bring down my father hither. So he reiterates, this is what I want you to do. Go bring Dad, bring him down here, explain to him where I am, what I've done, and let's be reunited here in Egypt. And at that point it says he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept. And Benjamin wept upon his neck. That's a special moment there between the two brothers, Joseph and Benjamin. Now they know that it's him. They're reunited after all these years. And Benjamin, again, is the little brother of Joseph. He's his little brother. And there's an affection there. There's a closeness. And so they have that moment as they weep together. And then verse 15 says, moreover, he kissed all his brethren and wept upon them. And after that, his brethren talked with him. So they all begin to break down. There's not a dry eye in the room now at this point, as they're all reunited, as they realize, as Joseph has explained to them exactly what's happened. And then it says at the end of verse 15 that then they talked with him. So up to this point, they haven't said anything yet. Did you notice that? It's Joseph that's done all the talking. They've just been there. So as he's explained it all to them, now they've broken down, they've wept, they've cried together. And then they're going to talk a little bit and they're going to have some sort of conversation there. And in verse 16, that's the last verse we'll read for today, it says, and the fame thereof was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brethren are come. And it pleased Pharaoh well, and his servants. So word gets out. word begins to spread that these are Joseph's brothers. These are relatives of Joseph. Now, this might seem obvious, but Pharaoh most likely didn't know that Joseph had siblings. And now he sees, oh, there's another 11 of them. Oh boy. I mean, that's either a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, it's a good thing if they're all like Joseph, but they're quite clearly not of the same caliber. But now Pharaoh hears that Joseph's brothers are in town. All 11 of them have come down here. A big bunch. And he could have been upset by that, but he's not. He's pleased. He's happy about it. And he's happy for Joseph, no doubt, to see there that Joseph's family are there. Again, Pharaoh doesn't know the whole story. He doesn't know that Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers. He doesn't know about the great forgiveness. He doesn't understand all of that. In his mind, they've come down to visit him. And he doesn't have all of the details. But what he does know is that they're there. So there is this special moment that's taken place here, as Joseph has now revealed himself to his brothers after these many years. And what's powerful to me, and is really the most powerful part of this story. I mean, there's two parts to it. The next part is what we'll see in Genesis 50, after Jacob dies, and this conversation basically comes up again. But this is the heart of our study here in this story. As we think about this idea that God meant it unto good. So the things that happened might not have been good. We may have been wronged. We may have been on the receiving end of someone else's sin and wickedness. But what we do from there is up to us. Where we go from there is up to us. We can live in a place of bitterness, of worry, of anger, of frustration, or we can choose to forgive. We can choose to live by faith, even though sometimes we're negatively affected by it. Sometimes we have to bear the brunt of the wrong that's done to us. Look at Joseph. He had to go to prison. He had to live as a slave, not because he did anything wrong, but he chose to carry that cross with forgiveness, with faith, with a love for the people around him, with a servant's heart. And look how God blessed him and lifted him up, even in spite of everything that's going on around him. And what a powerful truth that God brings good out of that. And not only does God bring good to Joseph, and this is what really blows my mind, but God brings good to the people who tried to ruin it all. The brothers. God saved their lives through Joseph. They could have just starved in Canaan. They could have gone without food and they could have just run out of supplies. And that would be what we would say, that's reaping what you sow. You know, what goes around comes around. They got it back. But they don't get what they deserve. God saves their lives through Joseph. God blesses them. And now they're all going to move down to Egypt. And they're going to get the benefits of living in a country where your brother's second in charge. And they've done nothing to merit that at all. In fact, they've done the opposite. They should get the death penalty, these guys. But they've got a complete 180 here, and their lives have changed for the better, again, because God's bringing good out of tragedies. And so, seeing this powerful truth, that God can bring good out of tragedy and that God is working, even though sometimes we mess things up completely, God still brings good out of it. That's the power that God has. So as we think about this truth and as we conclude this morning, I want to give you a couple of things to take away from this lesson. And the first one is this, that the trials we face in life are about more than just you. And it's easy to see when you're in a trial, to see your suffering, your hurt, your pain. And that's all valid and true. But often in our trials, God is doing something beyond just us. Joseph didn't realize it maybe in the moment, in the well, in Potiphar's house as a slave, in a prison cell. He most likely did not realize what God was doing at that point in the lives of other people. His brothers, his dad, his family, and ultimately a nation. But God was using and used the suffering of Joseph to help a whole country. Millions of people were helped by Joseph who didn't even know who he was. They had no idea of his story. I mean, your average citizen in Egypt wouldn't have known anything about Joseph. But God used Joseph's trial to help other people. And so remember that in your own trials and in your own tragedies. Remember that God is sometimes doing something beyond your life. You might know it, you might find out later on, you might never find out. But God can use the things that happen in our lives in profound ways. And like I said, God moved Joseph around. Think of Mary and Joseph, how God moved them around. God used the most powerful man in the world, Caesar, to do that. God's not limited in the pieces he can move around. So when you are in a trial, look up and see God and see what God can do in your trial. So it's often it's more than just about us. The other thing I want you to see in this story and in this great truth here is that, and I know this sounds obvious, but God's always in control. That's one of the simplest truths in the Bible, but it's one of the easiest to forget. I'll say that again. It's the easiest to forget. But it's so true. And we know it. If I was to ask you, is God in control? We would say yes very quickly. But sometimes when we're tested, when we're struggling, it's also the hardest thing to accept. That God knows what he's doing. God is doing something here. God hasn't lost control of the steering wheel for a second. Because if he did, we'd all be cactus. You'd find out quick enough. But that's not the God we serve. That's not the God of the universe. He holds everything together simultaneously at one time. And you can't even get your head around it. All that God does at once. That's his power. That's his knowledge. That's his ability. Because he's God, we're not. But he's always in control. He never loses grip of the steering wheel. He never loses control of circumstances. To us, it might look like it's a tornado. Things are just spinning around and flying everywhere. To God, it's not. To God, everything will work out. And he has a plan in it, so we can rest in that. The other thing that I want you to take away from this is that as we look, and this is more of a forward application, but as we look at our own lives, evil is already defeated. Now, we live in a world that is full of evil. It's full of wrongdoing. It's full of hurt. But evil has an end. It has an expiry date. And so that's something that can give us confidence moving into the future. That although there are things that hurt us in this life, there are evils around us that we live with, that we exist with, they have already been defeated. Their doom is sure. They have an end date. And ultimately, there will come a time when God will make all things right. Jesus will come again. He will set up a kingdom on this earth. We will be with him forever. And so all of the injustices and the things we see around the world that bother us, they will all be dealt with. And so there is an end for that. It's not like evil will prevail. And again, sometimes we know that. But again, when we're on the spot and we're under pressure, it's easy to forget that. It's easy to seem like evil's just everywhere and evil's overwhelming and evil's going to win. But just come back to the previous point, that God's always in control. God knows what he's doing. And even evil itself, it's already defeated. Christ defeated evil and death for us on the cross. He already won. He fought the battle and won. And we can claim victory in him. Now, yes, we still have the presence of evil here. But one day we'll be delivered from that even too. But we don't have to live under bondage or under oppression of it, because Christ has given us the victory. We can rise above the evils that are around us. The other thing I want you to take away from this, and this is the last point I have for this morning, and I'm going to reiterate this again in a few weeks' time, but God is always only good. Again, simple truth. I'm probably not telling you something you didn't know already. But God is always good, and he's only ever good, because that's his very nature. He cannot do evil. He cannot do the wrong thing. It's absolutely 1000% impossible for him to make a mistake. And that's what separates us so greatly from him, is he simply cannot do wrong ever. So when you look at your own life, as you walk with him, as you trust him, the things that are happening in your life that God allows, that God is working through, they are designed, if you're walking with him, for your good. And he cannot make a mistake. He just simply cannot get it wrong, because it's his nature. It's his very makeup. So when you look at what's happening in your life, choose to see it this way, because ultimately it does come back down to a choice. because there's truth involved here, but we have to accept the truth. We have to choose to see the world this way. So take these lenses and put them on, and choose to see the world the way that Joseph saw the world, which is the way that God wants you to see the world, which is that the things that are happening to you, while they might be terrible, they might be painful and hurtful, God has a plan in it. And that's why Joseph could look at the people who had done so wrong to him, and he could have a spirit of forgiveness. And he could say to them, it wasn't you. It wasn't you. That's a powerful thing to say to someone who's hurt you physically. It wasn't you. God had a plan in this. And have a look at what he did. And the fruit and the evidence of it's all around them. As the brothers looked at Egypt, and they looked at people coming in from all over the world to buy food, because no one had the food. But Joseph had the food, and Egypt had the food. And God did use Joseph's life. The fruit was all around them, right there for them to see. God can. And that's what enabled Joseph to look at them and say, it wasn't you, it was God. God was working, even through your sin, for good. And that's what God's doing in your life too. And I hope that you can see the world that way, that you can see what God is doing in your life. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for our study today. We thank you for this encouraging truth, Lord, this uplifting truth, and Lord, this life-changing truth that enables us to go through the darkest of valleys, knowing that we have a Saviour that's right there beside us, who hasn't forgotten us, who hasn't made a mistake, who hasn't lost control somehow of circumstances. Lord, I pray that you would give us an unshakable faith, a confidence in you. And Lord, help us to be an example just like Joseph was, of what the grace of God can do in a life. Father, all of us have different hurts. All of us have been wronged differently, treated badly by different people. Sometimes, Lord, we're the ones that hurt other people. But Lord, we're thankful that even in spite of us, you're still working for our good and even beyond us, as we lift our eyes up and look at the people around us, who sometimes you use us to help without even us realizing it. Lord, cause us to look at you today. Help us to see a good God that loves us, that cares for us, and that wants the best for us. Lord, I pray that you would encourage us in these truths, and we'll thank you in Jesus' name.